Все, стрим пошел, поехал. Опять 25 FPS, опять лаги. Отличная ситуация, просто зашибись. Идем дальше. Продолжаем играть в первое дерево. Кто не посмотрел прошлого стрима, это вот тот лис, который взрослый стоит. Это рядом с ним, если еще не листья, это маленькие лисят. Откуда они, я не хочу вам отвечать. И в прошлой серии мы бегали по локациям, собирали воспоминания, типа много чего узнали. Желательно посмотрите э, предыдущий стрим, чтобы понимать, что происходит в этом. И у нас у этого лиса женщина в голове разговаривает. Это очень странно, но у нас такой лис, увы. Другого мы выбрать не можем. Э, Итак, всем, кто пришел, всем приятного просмотра. Погнали. Продолжить. Я думал, лаги уберутся, наверное, это все из-за стрима. Кто знает. Подождите, тут FPS повысился. 26-27. Загрузкой больше FPS. КПУ загружен на 80%. Это вообще за что? Вот это, если что, картинка. Куда бралась? Опять у нас лагает. Опять мы бежим с 25 FPS. Пошли. Опа. Что? Открытый мир тут написано, прикиньте.
I did want to do something a little different with this level. I wanted it to be more open world feel and that there was something blocking your progress, so it did encourage people to look closely and see how to unlock this blocked way. And I do like just walking around this level and listening to the beautiful music by Josh Kramer. His work really sets the mood for the whole game.
Понятно. Теперь нас здесь ожидает открытый мир и никакого сюжета. Пошли дальше. Мне стало интересно, как здесь поубавить графику. Я помню, как я смотрел, чтобы в Assassin's Creed убрать высокую графику. Там надо залезать в код игры. Я залезал, менял. Или не залезал, не менял. А я залезал, менял.
My dad built a lot of stuff in his free time. If he wasn't watching fly fishing or reading Tom Clancy novels, he was carving something. He made tons of birdhouses. Not that he was into bird watching, but I think he really missed working and adding on to the home. If he couldn't afford the time to build onto our own house, he would have to settle with watching birds move into their little homes. We kept an old mattress in the bed of that ugly yellow truck, so we would drive it deep into the woods and then watch the birds fly into their houses while the sun set. Usually it was accompanied by venison jerky or a cold Coke, but not a lot of talking, which is how we both liked it.
Слушайте, до меня только сейчас дошло. Может, это не Лис нам рассказывает, а просто это типа биография, что ли? Типа, знаете, книгу автор каких и других людей пишет, а то же самое и с этой игрой. А?
Earlier I said I just love going through video games and exploring, like looking at every nook and cranny and just trying to find little details. And I think that started because in middle school and high school I would make mods for my favorite games, namely Jedi Knight, Jedi Outcast, and Far Cry. And I loved like this huge world of mod makers who would make these levels, and it'd be like the most random creative things, and I would just love exploring, usually multiplayer levels by myself. So even though I went to college for film, before that, like before high school, I was making video games and mods, and it was my favorite thing in the world. I made a ton of different levels. I made an abandoned space hotel with a dance floor and cafeteria. I made a haunted campground with cabins and tents. I made this whole city with like the first ever day-night cycle with running showers and stuff in the hotel and the apartment buildings. And I just loved making those mods. And I think that carries over to my game, the first tree, and also the one before that, Home is Where One Starts, which is it's exploration. You're just looking around and appreciating the details.
Угу. Просто потому что лагает, наверное, небольшой функционал. Может, что-нибудь не будет.
We were happiest underneath the evergreens. We decided it was time to finally map out the hundreds of acres we lived on, just to pass the time during the summer. He was only free in the evenings, so I would spend the day wasting time on dial-up internet and sketching, and then we would rush into the woods, pen and map in hand, before evening fell. Sometimes, the aurora borealis would cast a cold green glow on the mountainside, and we would finish our route underneath a twilight sky. Sometimes I was lonely during those summer days, but there was comfort in the routine.
A lot of teenagers aren't looking for the daily grind, though. There's nothing wrong with wanting to get out, to leave your childhood home. You wanted to progress, to make something of yourself.
Yeah, you're right. That house. I'm sure it's the same as how I left it. Then why does it feel so different?
I doubt you're the only adult to have looked back and asked that question.
Мне кажется, все больше то, что нам автор так рассказывает о себе. То есть ты бегаешь за Лизой и одновременно не понимаешь, что происходит, но при этом узнаешь что-то. Потом с каким-то моментом тебе приходит осознание того, что, например, не Листа рассказывает. Я сидел все это время с закрытым микрофоном, да? Класс. Что еще расскажете? Или я просто не замечаю этого уже. У меня здесь как бы в наушниках самих нет микрофона. Поэтому все работает через телефон. Капец. Как можно на... Опа. Зачем я эти звезды собираю? Ты угораешь, да? Опа. Опа. Идем дальше. Нифига себе. Я-то думал, что-то собирать надо. Пошли-ка обратно. Если я знаю, куда идти. Просто на предыдущем стриме вообще недоумевал, что с этими штуками делать надо. Знать бы, где-то первая находится. Думаю, эта звездочка означает то, что я могу сделать какое-то действие, а 0 из 3 там что-то собирать надо. Типа, как только ты начнешь взаимодействовать с этой штукой, если ты на нее встаешь, то я думал, эта звездочка означает то, что типа уже с этим можно взаимодействовать, а оказывается, все гораздо проще. Звездочка нам показывает, когда надо взаимодействовать. А 0 из 3 это то, что надо открывать. Это поворот. Теперь надо найти ту первую. Я помню, она была там завалена корнями. Глаза стоят на эту комнату вообще другими глазами. Вы знаете, о чем еще может быть думаю? Может быть, я на этом телефоне домашний лёг включать не буду, а люблю... Ну да, не буду. О, все, нашел. Говорю, кого-нибудь Там. Еще он это вон там, наверное.
I don't think the first tree could work at all without the music by Josh Kramer. And his music, it's actually publicly available to license, and so it was affordable for me since this was a hobby project. And it's something I like to tell new indie developers all the time, like, you can't afford that composer, you can't afford a full-time programmer, you need to cut corners and finish your game, and the way to do that is to use these amazing publicly available assets that anyone can purchase and license. And so his music it's incredible, and I actually haven't talked to him that much, I've just emailed him, but his music was nominated for Most Emotional Music at the Emotional Game Awards in France, and he's just a really nice guy. And I think there's so much amazing content out there that if you're thinking of making a game, like, look around and see what you can make work on a tight budget, because it worked really well for the first tree.
Более-менее понял этого трёха.
On our property, there were old abandoned pieces of a shed and car long left unused. I used to ask him all the time who those people were that left all this junk. And I'm sure he got so tired of hearing it that he made up some elaborate stories how a brown bear ate them and haunted the woods afterwards. What's funny is I think it made those people seem more real. Growing up thinking they were still hanging out, like they couldn't say goodbye. I used to tell my friends how I could swear I saw spirits move near the water, and that always freaked them out. I guess it didn't bother me, because the way I saw it, they were normal people with old cars and sheds, just trying to figure out how to survive and be happy in the middle of nowhere. It was a cool thought that they didn't want to leave, but you know, I was a weird kid.
Well, you had good company since those ghosts like living in a place where they were brutally devoured.
Alert. Классные настройки, просто я в шоке. Шотся. Динамика. Зачем мне это сейчас? Мне нужно, чтобы меня уведомляло то, чтобы я понимал, когда мне приходит сообщение, чтобы не приходило типа уведомление, вот он то. Типа в чат кто-то написал. Может мне лучше вот так вот сразу начать делать и все? Просто я не вижу электронного человека, который это врубает. Так, просто нужно. Я вот бегаю по этому миру, мне холодает. Приятно холодает. Потому что вот такие игры не часто же играешь, в конце концов. Я застрял в хитбоксе дерева. Что-то здесь текстуры меньше, чем хитбокс, это неправильно. Должно быть наоборот. Либо текстура должна занимать весь хитбокс, либо часть его, либо выходить за его рамки. Чтобы... У меня право мухи заиграло там всякое. Что у нас там? Ведь там какой-то дичь чаще всего. И, видимо, мне показалось, потому что тут просто это земля. Тут ничего не светится. Нужно найти третий камушек, на котором я смогу последить за точкой и пройти там, где закрыто корнями. А я пока этого места не нашел. А теперь врубим монолог, потому что скучно. Что это? Storytelling.
Almost all stories follow the same kind of structure. And it starts with an inciting event, and then there's rising action, and then there's a climax, and then there's falling action. And it's actually really difficult to make an interesting story where you only hear these two people talking, and it's spoken through a dream that's already happened that isn't directly related to this couple at all. So I don't know what I was thinking, but my hope was that it would create some interesting things and connections that I didn't see before. And that was kind of the whole exercise of making the first tree.
Вот тут говорится о том, что он хотел создать игру про какое-то животное. Выбрал лиса, и типа появилось такое первое дерево. В смысле, как игра. Не самое первое дерево в мире, а игра первое дерево. Здорово. Тебя как раз искал. Ну. Ты угораешь, что ли? Нужно смотреть на нас. Ну. Не хочет, прикиньте, не хочет. Давай быстрее, а. Может, я не так что встал. А, надо поймать. Не понял. Полетели. Уи. Можно теперь бежать спокойно совестью дальше. Должны были раздвинуться корни. Я не закрыл микрофон? Не, я закрыл. Тоже играют. 20 минут вообще все равно. Ладно, остальные звезды подбирать уже не буду, не хочу особо с этим заморачиваться, потому что лагает. Я, конечно, все понимаю, там пацан старался сделать крутую игру. Но тут музыка прям по ушам бьет. Это неправильно, так не должно быть. Это неприятно. Когда ты хочешь играть, у тебя музыка бьет по ушам, вместо того, чтобы слышать атмосферные. О, что слышите атмосферные?
Perpetrator stood nearby, unfazed, like nothing was wrong. My dad is dead, and he's never coming back, Rachel. I can tell you these stories, but I can never reminisce with him again. He can never hold a grandchild that we'll probably never be able to have. I can never talk to him again, and I'll never be able to say I'm sorry for everything. It was really important to me that the wolf in this story that takes the fox's cubs, that it wasn't explained at all. Like, it's just this entity that's in the background. And of course it's supposed to represent something bigger than a wolf or even the fox. It's supposed to represent like the specter of death, and it comes when you least expect it. There's no justification. He's just there, always watching.
Если к ним подойду, он будет убегать. Мне прыгать, да? Ура! Я прыгнул! Собственно, где волк? Он сзади бежит за мной, да? Странно. Волк, ты кого пытаешься обмануть? Я же видел, ты побежал. Ты не можешь бежать быстрее меня. Никого. 8. Я не знаю, это просто, во-первых, собирать нечего, во-вторых, музыка играет. Очень такая, ну, такая. Я чувствую, что я обязан просто бежать. Бежать вперед и не оглядываться. Меня заставляет это делать воспоминания, которые вон там.
just can't talk about this anymore. Good night.
Это все? Чё типа дальше? Это опять открытый мир, опять бегать? Тут просто заняться особо-то нечем. Просто бегаешь за лисом, собираешь всякую дичь. Занимаешься не пойми чем. О, нашел дорожку. Ура, я нашел дорожку. Настоящий истинный путь. Нашел в эту гору. Опять экран затемняется, чтобы загрузить новую игру, которая будет лагать. Не, ну надеюсь, следующая локация не будет так лакать, лакать. Значит, кот лакает, собака тоже может лакать. Это какая-то локация. Так локация не лакает, а лагает. Опа. Не лагает, прикиньте, не лагает. А почему стрим у меня идет 25 FPS? Что-то не понял.
Joseph, you can't go to sleep feeling like this. I'm sorry for everything, and I know you need space, but I'm here for you. You don't need to feel so lost. Joseph, have I ever told you what my mother was like?
Hello, my name is Elise Whaley, and I was the voice actress for Rachel. I'm also David's wife, so that was convenient for working together. I was actually the voice actress for his first game, Home is Where One Starts, and I guess that I did a good enough job that David wanted me back, so I did the voice acting for this one as well. David definitely coached me through it because I'm pretty inexperienced when it comes to that. Home is Where One Starts was my first time ever doing voice acting of any kind. And we watched a lot of trailers of movies we liked to get the voice right of female leads who were talking in the trailer and try to mimic that and bring that into the game so that had the right kind of feel and the right kind of atmosphere for the voice. My character actually is the same character from Home is Where One Starts. If you've played that game, you probably connected that together.
Почему здесь нет субтитров, когда он просто говорит?
Probably about 15 years later, maybe 20 years later, in this game. I was happy to revisit the character of Rachel. We kind of leave her in an ambiguous spot in Home is Where One Starts. It definitely ends on a hopeful note, but there's not a lot of details. And in this game, you see that she's able to move on through a lot of her issues that she had from her abusive home and be able to start her own family and start a new cycle without that abuse, which I think is really inspiring.
You know what it's like not to have a mom at home. And you know how hard that made my childhood. What helped me was watching the birds in the morning before the school bus came. I thought that my mother was one of those birds. And it made me want to be free like her. My mom taught me how to fold origami cranes while she was in the hospital. So I told myself I would fold one every day until I could fly myself. I think we both have always loved animals, and for me that love started with a dog. Sometimes this Rottweiler would come up to our property line and wait at the fence for me, but only once in a while. I was sure to check every day immediately after school, and it usually ended in disappointment. I would even steal money from my passed-out dad just so I could buy these off-brand dog biscuits. Even when she did stop by, she never went beyond the fence. Why was she so scared?
Мне знаете, это что напоминает? Я, короче, сейчас так вот, если подумать, то если убрать Лизу сейчас, то я сразу вспоминаю архив в Genshin Impact, там такая же картинка сзади.
So it's always interesting working with your spouse because, especially on a creative project, because they want your feedback, but it's something that's also dear to their heart, and they're dear to your heart, and you definitely don't want to hurt their feelings. So I was a little nervous when David asked me, he had finally finished writing the script, and he asked me to go over it and see what I thought. And I had minored in English. I majored in art, but I minored in English, so I felt like I had a little bit of experience. But I was definitely like a little scared because you don't want to be too harsh, but you also want to be honest. And it was the biggest relief when I read the script, and I was like, oh, good. My husband's a good writer. I don't have to change that much about this, just a few like grammatical things. And that was just like the biggest relief for me because it can be a tricky balance working with your spouse and making sure that that honesty is there, but also that love and the support is there as well.
I think my dad was the opposite of your dad in almost every way, except he was in the military as well. He coped with alcohol of every kind. The trailer started falling apart, he got angry, and I withdrew. More and more I became the weird, quiet kid who made lots of origami birds and carried talk biscuits around. I think we were pretty similar when it came to being the weird kids. And that same sincerity in college was one of the reasons I was so drawn to you. Life got worse and worse. And at one point, I really didn't think I could survive another day with my soul still intact. I had no real friends, let alone neighbors, since we lived in the middle of nowhere. I should have talked to my teacher, but I was scared what he would do if he found out. As I waited for the school bus one morning, I walked around until I found something in an abandoned shed. Something I can't put into words.
Just smooth.
So we're talking about Home is Where One Starts a lot, so if you haven't played that game, maybe this doesn't make as much sense, or maybe this is a little plug that you should go play it. But in that game, it actually features one of my artworks. I work as an artist and paper cutting, actually, and David used one of my artworks as a graffitied stencil in Home is Where One Starts that's against the wall of this shack. And it actually shows up again in the first tree, just a fragment of it. The first tree, the title actually comes from one of my artworks that I made back in 2015, I want to say. And I made this artwork while I was pregnant with our first child. And it had a lot of meaning for me, and David actually helped me come up with the title. And he asked, because I was really struggling, I was like, I have no idea what to call this, and I always go to David for title ideas and to bounce ideas off of him, and that's like the only way I can ever come up with a title is by talking with him. So we were talking back and forth and looking at this artwork, and he said, well, what kind of like movies or shows were you watching while you're making the artwork? Because my work's pretty tedious, so sometimes I'll watch a show or do some Netflix binging while I'm creating it. And I was like, oh, I actually watched Tree of Life a ton. And then we're like, Tree of Life, and we started thinking more about that, and then arrived at the first tree. So it started off as one of my artworks, and then became a part of David's art, which I think is really cool that we were able to share that title.
I summoned courage I didn't know I had, and I broke into my dad's room and found the key to the shed where he had locked my bike. I'll never forget that feeling. The wind rushing by my ears as the sun rose over the fields of wheat. I was flying for the first time. I biked as far as my legs could take me until I found a house that felt friendly, and that felt like home. Those strangers helped me in so many ways. And if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have found my foster family. And if it wasn't for my parents, I wouldn't have met you. You have strength, Joseph, and you're not as alone as you think.
It's all just so pointless. Just waiting for life to happen. It's like having the home I always wanted is cursed out of my reach. The thought of being a parent myself. How could I do that when I couldn't even be a good son? I'm sorry. I know what you're saying. I just don't know how things will work out. These quiet hours will turn into years. We'll wonder which roads passed us by.
Then we'll forge a new road together. Besides, I discovered for myself that one fateful morning where any hopeful road leads to. There may be thorns and mist, but it always leads to the same thing.
And what's that?
Family.
I'm so glad that you're part of my family, Rachel.
And I'm glad you're part of mine.
Glad. Я сразу понял, кладется
The
за...
question I get a lot is why a fox? And it ties into just how important family is for me. And Fox is actually a family name from my wife's side, from Elise. And she always heard about the legacy of the Fox family.
Олень.
And because of that, growing up, it was her favorite animal. She even made these 2 wooden foxes for our wedding cake toppers. So I thought it would be cool to have that animal in the game while these 2 people are having this conversation in the middle of the night.
Олень. Ничего себе. Много оленей. А мелких я вот сейчас нет. А, вот я за этим вот бежал. Это больше был. Точно был. А вот нет. Вот туда, ребят. Олень, дорого, олень. Ну, забрать туда. Кто-нибудь покажет, расскажет, не знаю. Я хочу туда. Возьмите меня на ручку, отнесите, пожалуйста. Да чё вы меня сбиваете, ДТП по оленей? Стоп. Ну и здесь не без багов. А вот и путь наверх. Да куст, отстань. Это всю атмосферу портит отсюда. На всякий случай посмотрю активность более, там что происходит. Вот антиконг, я помню. Примерно такая же ситуация. Где олень? А, олень, там я все там. Где волк? Нет оленя, дайте волка. Нет волка, дайте оленя. Если ни того, ни другого, то оставьте меня в покое, пожалуйста. Не заставляйте меня бегать туда-сюда. Уберите лаги.
The fox knew her last cub would be waiting for her at the first tree. She was almost there. The rain cascaded onto the Jade Valley where the entrance to the tree was. Life was protected there, because that's where life began. It was now only a mother and a daughter left. Items from my life still dotted the ground as she moved closer to her destination and destiny.
Ого, всё. Оказывается, тут самой лисички есть. Это не лис. Рисую грамматику. Не лис. Это лиса. Все, запомнили. Это лиса, а не лис. Автор рассказывает о себе. Автор рассказывает о лисе. Лисе. Я лисенка, которых убил волк. Картинка просто начинает складываться, вы понимаете? Мне явно не наверх. Мне туда. Мне вперед. Своей судьбе сказал автор. Это поражение. Приятно.
Usually what catches people's attention of the first tree is the visuals, of course. And I was inspired by a lot of people making these levels. The second level is inspired by just these beautiful autumn photos of a real forest. And this level, the Jade Valley, is inspired by the artwork of Heather Penn, who did the Overland games. I just love those greens with a lot of gray in it. I love the strong vignettes in the corners of the frame. And of course, this environment pack was made by the very talented Swedish designer Mikael Gustafsson. And of course, his initial designs inspired me, and I was able to build off of that. And I'm really grateful that he allowed his environment pack to be made publicly available.
Понятно. А сейчас в настройки зайти не могу, видимо, да. Там еще одна бубудилка. Бу-бу-бу-бу-бу-бу. Опа, дом. Пошли туда. А ну, туда. Дом, дрова.
By now you've probably caught on to some of the themes.
Короче, помимо сюжета, он рассказывает о себе и о том, как создавалась игра. То есть его встречали игры с открытым миром.
Basically, it boils down to this delicate balance between nature and its relationship with life and death. And I love these stories where they put like these microscopic relationships, like something of like a father and a son, and juxtapose it next to this epic story of like the creation of the universe and the first tree on Earth, and how they can be equally as important, because in my mind, like, my family is as important as like the creation of the Earth. And it reminds me of like some of the stories I love, like The Road by Cormac McCarthy, or The Tree of Life by Terrence Malick. Basically, I wanted to make sure the player felt that there was a higher power than themselves, and that there was something watching over them as they went through this story.
Я зайти в дом-то могу? А тут дверь заболела, не могу. Сколько у нас тут? 45 минут. 45 минут пролетели незаметно. Всего лишь 3 раза посмотрел на время. Нет, 4. Точно 4 раза посмотрел. Там я уже подъем, давайте туда пойдем. Я могу подниматься. То есть так было задумано. Вот только вот то, что сюда вообще буду подниматься. Где такой вообще ни разу не было. Да вот что ты мне тупо нормально. Не туда. Да? Почему не могу перепрыгнуть? Это плохо. По деревьям можно там стоять, а мне нет, да? Во. В смысле? Да ладно. Ну не может быть, чтобы мне здесь нельзя было бегать. Мне предоставили такую возможность, они пусть не ее отдаются. Да это мне и воспользоваться в полной мере. Как я, по-вашему, туда залезу, если туда залезть тупо невозможно?
Was that the last time you talked to him?
No, I called on holidays, and he would call on my birthday. I guess we acted like nothing ever happened, which was stupid. Didn't want to ask about his lumberyard, and I'm sure he didn't want to ask about my job search. I never went back and visited. I think the last conversation we had was about what movies we had seen and what exactly a best boy is in the credits. I thought he would be here so much longer.
Не понял. А волк? Лисенок.
In the distance, the first tree illuminated the wasteland. She couldn't go home anymore. She did the only thing she was capable of. Moving forward. My dad died alone in the middle of the wilderness. I should have been talking to him more.
Что мы увидели последнего дохлого листка, она расстроилась. Обидно. Обидно. На
If
самом
the
деле реально
first tree on
жалко.
Earth brought life with it,
Обидно очень.
if it taught the birds to sing and fly and showed saplings how to grow,
Трагедия. Небо
what
покраснело.
could it do for us?
Obviously, there's a really emotional part, but I'm going to talk through it anyway. A lot of people correctly identify that Journey was like a huge inspiration for the first tree. And this part, it is like a callback to that part where you're climbing up the mountain with your friend you don't know, and it just gets snowier and snowier, and you just keep going, and then eventually you collapse. And that made a huge impact on me. And I don't even own a PlayStation 3 or 4. I rented a PlayStation from like a rent-a-center right after completing Home is Where One Starts, just because I'd heard so much about it. And everyone was right, it was a very impactful game, and it definitely inspired the first tree.
Обидно очень.
There was a letter I received yesterday from a name I didn't recognize, with a quote I can't stop thinking about. Death is not the opposite of life, but a part of it. More and more, I'm realizing one important truth. Each of us have our own journey to the first tree. But sometimes I'm not sure I'm ready to take that first step.
You already have my love.
Ты что, хромаешь? Нет, не хромает, он нормально. Я куда хоть идти-то? Обидно, все дела, но куда мне идти? Хочу забраться типа наверх, типа, чтобы красиво закончил. Дыра. Сюжетная дыра. Ладно, пошли. Ладно, не буду подключать телефон. Ребята, расскажите, пожалуйста. Ладно, видимо, что-то пропустил. Вообще жалко, что этого никто сейчас не видит в прямом эфире. Ну, ребята, это вообще плохо. Это не очень хорошо. Только печальные моменты никто не видит. Так нельзя вообще делать. Так делать вообще нечестно. Первое дерево пробуждается и мягко спрашивает: хочет ли лиса сказать что-то напоследок своим детям? Лиса отвечает: что? Так вот зачем эти звезды. Допустим, давайте что-то прям вот реально нормально такое напишем. Вот. Это если не обращайте внимание на то, что я пишу от женского рода, это как бы я от лица от морды лисы пишу, нормально всё.
guess her journey was over. But I have no idea. It was only a dream. A distraction from tomorrow.
I don't think dreams normally bring back to memory so many important feelings. Maybe it was just a dream, but it was also a gift.
Yeah, I suppose. But tomorrow we're getting on a plane to the last place on Earth I want to be. The only person that would have made the trip worth it is gone.
You're going to see him and be with him one last time before you say goodbye. I have one last quote for you by Emerson, sealed in an imaginary letter from me to you. It is the secret of the world that all things subsist and do not die, but only retire a little from sight and afterward return again. Go to sleep, my love. We have a big day tomorrow, but I'll be there with you every step of the way.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. Good night, Rachel.
Good night, Joseph.
Я не могу просто. Концовка такая, что прямо сейчас сижу и ног не чувствую. Мне реально нравится такое. И 0 человек смотрит, что это просто гениально, просто класс. Никто не видел этого всего. Все только смотрят записи, очень обидно. Шесть месяцев спустя. Я уже хотел стрим заканчивать, но нет. 6 месяцев спустя. В смысле? Ой. Так гораздо хуже лайос, понимаешь? Ну ладно. Не врубается, кружку творить нельзя. Подбираться? Кружка не подбирается, ну ладно. Чемодан. Вот те самые олени. Что за...
You're probably thinking, what is going on? And that was definitely my intention for this epilogue part of the first tree. This is my favorite part. This is the part I'm most proud of. And it definitely, like, it's supposed to evoke this, like, what is going on? Where am I? I was not expecting this. When I was marketing and blogging about making the game, I never showed anyone this part. I never told anyone. I never shared screenshots. I wanted it to be a complete surprise. And I also wanted it to feel a little creepy because it's totally inspired by those nights where you wake up in the middle of the night and you can just hear the sounds of the wind outside the house and you can't sleep, so you walk around in this like twilight stupor. And I would say the whole first part of this game where you play as the fox, its whole purpose is to set up for this conclusion. So yeah, I would encourage you to look around and see how many things you recognize from the earlier part of the game.
Угу. Теперь что, к холодильнику идти я встал? Ну, пожрать, наверное, хочу. Или это еще далеко не все? Это я уже прослушал, не надо. Выходим на улицу. О, наверное, кто сюда здесь.
I tried hard to foreshadow this epilogue, just because I wanted it to be a surprise, but I didn't want it to feel too out of place that it would be humorous. And so, Joseph, earlier in the game, he would say things like, I felt like I was right behind the fox the whole time. In my mind, the camera perspective acts as a metaphor for who the player is, what they're seeing. If the camera represents Joseph, or just like that video game trope of having the camera follow you. I guess the big question I wanted the player to ask themselves Is this a dream as well? And if so, does that even matter?
Это еще далеко не все. Ну ладно, давайте тогда закончим. Уже час прошел, так смотрю. Ну, если вам понравился этот стрим, то, естественно, ставьте лайк, подписывайтесь на канал, ссылка на донат будет в описании. Ну, а я заканчиваю. Всем goodbye, с вами был Майнхайр.